Okay. Hello, everyone. Hope everybody out there is doing awesome. It's noon right on the dot, so I want to go ahead and get started. And first of all, just say thank you to all of you for joining us today and also for the work that you do, because I find the people that are tuning into these webinars that are starting to engage in the conversation around some of the topics we've been bringing up are really truly dedicated to improving their workplace, their work environment, or their team area or their communities, regardless of where or how they serve or what they do. So I want to make sure I say thank you to you for that as well. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Looking forward to today's topic. The Design Your Days Fall webinar series. This is our kickoff one on courageous conversations. So this webinar is presented in partnership with the League of Women in Government, and this is the primary partnership between Lantz Strategies and the League. One of the things we like to offer, they're a fantastic organization. If you're not familiar with them, I encourage you to track them down online via their website. They have a job board, events, other webinars, newsletter. They do special promo type events depending on the time of year. And they're just really overall an awesome umbrella organization working to improve gender balance, diversity, and inclusion in local government. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nicole Lantz. I'm the CEO of Lantz Strategies. Just a little bit about me. My background is actually in local government. I spent almost 13 years working in local government in a variety of capacities, serving as a Parks Recreation Library Director, serving as a Public Works Director, and also serving as a Deputy City Manager and an Assistant City Manager here in Arizona. I'm also the managing partner of a joint venture with my colleague Eric Bailey. That firm is called Extraordinary Balance, and we really focus on strategic planning and diversity and inclusion work for organizations that are serving the community. So really that idea of serving those who serve. Just a little bit about me, because sometimes it's nice to connect a little differently with the people that you're hearing from over a webinar. This is my family. My stepdaughter Micah is the one in the U.S. Navy uniform. She's coming home tonight at 12:43 a.m. We're looking forward to having her back. And we thought after 18 years, wouldn't it be so much fun to start over from scratch? So that's my little one, Emerson, down there in the corner as well. That's also the only normal picture I could find of my husband, Sean. And if you don't believe me, this is what the other one looked like. And if you still don't believe me, this is what the third option looked like. So we went ahead and went for the other family photo. Okay, so I also want to take a minute as we start to talk about the power of partnerships. And there's one partner in particular that I want to mention, and that is SGR. SGR is a local, national recruitment firm. They're really focused on servant leadership, but they have this really amazing tool that they just launched, the SG recruiting tool. And so if you're either actively searching or you're just open to new opportunities, you can actually go create a profile online, and it remains partially anonymous until you decide that you want to unmask it. And so employers can actually search for you through their database. It's a really incredible tool. SGR is just an awesome company, so I encourage you to check them out. But their website's down in the bottom corner. If you're looking to advance in your career, looking to connect, or looking to learn more, definitely check them out. Okay, so today we're going to do the same content and Q&A format that we've been following for the last couple of webinars. And today we're really going to focus on giving you some micro strategies for courageous conversations. So we'll talk a little bit about what that is, what that looks like, and then equip you with some tools and then take your questions. In GoToWebinar, you should have a little dialog box off to the side where you can submit questions. So please, at any point during the webinar, go ahead and submit your question if you've got one, and then I'll tackle it at the end of the webinar. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so today the other caveat is that these aren't just courageous conversations with others. These are actually going to be some micro strategies focusing on courageous conversations that you need to be having with yourself as well. I think a lot of times it's easy to focus on everyone else, and that's a little bit less scary, even though it's still intimidating, than getting into what our own self-dialogue looks like. So we're going to tackle that as well. This is generally how people feel when someone says we need to talk. It's like, ooh, that's not really the thing I want to be having right now. This isn't comfortable. I'm not looking forward to it. So I want to demystify that a little bit and give you some frameworks for when you do actually need to talk to someone about something that may not be very comfortable. How do you actually do that? And so again, this idea of courageous conversations being anything that is, maybe something that is work related, maybe it's something in the personal sphere, but is just kind of generally a conversation that requires a little bit of courage. It's a topic that might be a little bit uncomfortable. There's a possibility of someone not receiving the conversation well, someone being challenged by some of what you relay. And so how do we help you have those in a really productive, effective way that preserves the relationship? So these might show up at work. You might find them in the supervisory sphere, might be a performance evaluation conversation you need to have. You might see it on a peer-to-peer level where, you know what, there's an issue with this coworker that I need to address. I'm not really sure the best way to do that. How do I make that happen? And sometimes it's with your boss, that famous idea of managing up in the organization when there's something that needs to be addressed between you and your supervisor. This is also a framework that can work for that. Easy to apply at home and in your personal sphere as well. So significant others or partners, potentially with family members. I like to think of, the holidays coming up in not too many more months down the road. A lot of times there's a possibility of needing a courageous conversation amidst some of the dialogue that comes up there. Or with your friends. It might be something that, hey, after this many years of knowing each other, we really need to surface this. Or maybe you're just starting out on a friendship journey with someone and something comes up and you're like, hey, you know what? Let's get this out of the way and see if we can really strengthen our foundation. So it can show up in a variety of ways. So how do we address them? A couple of micro strategies on this, really centered around that how. First of all, use the framework of a courageous conversation. Sometimes just simply stating, you know what, Jim, I need to talk to you. We need to have a little bit of a courageous conversation about this topic. Sometimes simply stating it that way can be enough to signal to the other person that, hey, I need to tune in here a little bit differently. Maybe this is a little bit more of a conversation that needs my attention than maybe I expected. I used to use this with an executive team I used to work with early in my career. And the group was really great, but almost polite to a fault to where issues wouldn't get addressed. And so this was a really easy framework when we had a tough topic to introduce. I would say, okay, we're all in a good place here. I need to have a little bit of a courageous conversation and surface a topic that needs to come out. And it became a bat signal to the group, if you will, that, we need to tune into this differently. So be direct. In just stating it outright. Where we slip up in these types of interactions is when we try to sugarcoat them or we try to minimize what we're trying to say, when really what needs to happen is it just simply needs to be said directly. It's okay to be candid. I think that's the best approach, but keep it succinct. And also remember to respect the other person's feelings. If you've been on the other end of one of these, there's times when you've walked away and said, hey, I wish they would have just tackled this a little bit differently. I wish they would have been a little softer in that approach. So it's okay to be respectful, but also be candid and direct. Second one, consider the setting. So many people go into these conversations and don't think about the where, and that's really going to trip them up because what happens is they find out, ooh, the walls are really thin. Maybe not the best place for the conversation. We met at a coffee shop and my other co-department director is sitting 2 tables over, potentially within earshot. So really think through even just the physical environment. I try to avoid having a physical barrier between me and whoever I'm having that conversation with. So I don't like to have a desk between me or a counter, and I don't prefer to do these over the phone. I think there's too much importance in body language and facial expressions that contribute to the conversation. Next, do your homework. Please be prepared when you go into a courageous conversation. If it's with your supervisor and you're asking for more work, please have done your homework about all of the awesome things that you've accomplished and the ways that you could contribute to the team in context of what your supervisor is trying to accomplish. That's one example. Really thinking through what led up to that dialogue in the first place. Actively and openly listen. I would say the majority of the people that I work with in coaching, team coaching, or in any group dynamic team training that I've ever given, overestimate their ability to listen. And if they're good at active listening and they hear you and they're really getting the content and they understand, they're not open to it. They're listening to it in order to reframe their rebuttal. And so to come into this conversation really willing to hear the other person and be open to what they're saying. So really challenge yourself on that as you're in that dialogue, doing that mental check. Hey, am I really listening to what they're saying? Am I open to changing my perspective? Doesn't mean you have to, but means you should be open to doing so. The next one, don't be afraid to push pause or set a follow-up meeting. This doesn't have to be a one and done conversation. And in fact, most of the truly courageous conversations I've had where there was a lot of vulnerability being asked of both parties in the conversation needed to occur at least in 2 meetings, if not in a series of meetings. Emotions can escalate. You might find out through your open listening that you didn't have all the information. And hey, I need to step back and get some more information or consider what you have to say before I continue the conversation. That can also be a really affirming thing to offer the other person, even if it's not resolution, but to say, you know, you've brought up a couple of good points. I'd really like to take some time and think them through before we continue the conversation. It's a good way of honoring what they're contributing to the dialogue, rather than making it feel like just a one-way talking to. It's a talking with. Okay, now I don't want to ignore the part of self-conversation that occurs between your ears. This is a really critical part of having courageous conversations, and it has to do with yourself. So first I want to offer some notes about our internal monologue. And so it's the kind of voice, that ongoing conversation that you have with yourself. What is that? What's going on there? And kind of how do we work within that in the terms of courageous conversations? So our brains are biologically wired to answer the questions we ask. Think about the last time anybody approached you in any context with a question, and maybe you didn't know the answer. What was the feeling that you had? It was like, ooh, I feel like I should know that, or I want to know that, I want to have that answer. It's because our brains are wired to answer the questions that we ask. It's a principle that can trip us up if we're not cognizant of that. We forget about that over time, and someone asks a question and we kind of back into an answer that sounds about right, and we're maybe like 90% sure that it's right, not 100%, but we go ahead and answer it anyway. This is what's going on. So keep an eye out for that, because that can get you into dangerous territory too. So when we say things like, why do I always make mistakes? How can I possibly keep screwing this up? Why am I such an idiot? Why am I so stupid? When we say things like that, our brain wants to respond. Okay, so we say things like, why am I so stupid? And our brain is wired to answer that question. It fills in the gap. I'm stupid because, and then insert whatever your answer might be for you. We all have different versions of this inner monologue. If you are someone who feels like you don't struggle with this, I want to encourage you to be aware that people around you are. Okay, so if it's not something that afflicts you and you're like, my inner monologue is great, I have the most supportive inner monologue of anybody I know, which is fantastic, and I'd love to get there myself someday, be cognizant of this and listen for it among your team members, because it can show up in their outward dialogue, and that can be a signal that they need different levels of support from you. So we say things, why am I so stupid? We fill in that answer. And so here's my story from this. A number of months ago, I was working with Eric, my co-managing partner of Extraordinary Balance. We were getting ready to go to an engagement in California the next day. And I needed to update some of our slides in the slide deck. We do it all over Google Drive. And so I was updating my slides and I said, yep, we're good. It's about 8:30 at night. I'm going to go ahead and just save them into the shared folder. We're good to go. See you at the airport in the morning. And I can't get the file to save. And so I start thinking to myself, man, I must be an idiot. I can't figure this out. You know, I've done this 100 times. What am I doing wrong? I must be doing something wrong. I can't believe I can't figure this out. Okay, I'm just going to email it instead. We'll just do it that way. And so go to attach it to the email, and all of a sudden, I go, holy cow, I can't get this document to attach to the email too. And I start this spiral, the death spiral in my own inner monologue. I'm such an idiot. How could I be so stupid? How could I run my own business? How could anybody have even allowed me to have a child, let alone be responsible for training other people on leadership? Down the drain, down the drain, down the drain. And finally decided to pull the plug on it and say, you know what, this simply isn't going to work. I will have to look at this in the morning. I'm obviously incapable of attaching a simple file. How can I be such a failure? We'll just have to figure it out tomorrow. So I go to bed, wake up in the morning, and I have a text message from Eric, who I'd been communicating my failure and my stupidity to in no uncertain terms the night before, with a link to this article. And so what had happened the night before was Google, Gmail, and Drive had global outages. And so I wasn't even capable of attaching the file, no matter how hard I tried, because Google was down. And that's what was going on. And so instead I wasted over an hour and a ton of stress and a ton of really negative inner monologue thinking I was the idiot that couldn't possibly figure it out because of something that was completely out of my control. So this idea of monitoring that inner dialogue and that inner monologue that's going on is one of those courageous self-conversations that you need to have. Now, I want to wrap up the content part with talking about one of my least favorite four-letter words, and that's the word just. So this is a word that becomes a license for bad behavior. It's how we excuse our own. It's also how we excuse others. I had a coworker once who, when it was just the two of us in a meeting, would take her shoes and socks off, if she had socks on, take shoes and socks off, and put her bare feet up on the furniture in the office. Totally grossed me out. I even mentioned it a few times, and her response was, oh, it's just that I'm more comfortable this way. I'm just more at ease here. It's just you and me. Don't worry about it. It's just a couple of bare feet. And it was really her excuse to have this totally disgusting, in my opinion, habit in the office, but it excused that bad behavior. So when we find ourselves saying, well, that's just the way things are in reference to a work environment, or that's just how it is around here, we need to monitor that dialogue and see, are we actually identifying something that should be addressed, something that needs to be tackled? We say things like, that's just how she is, or, well, he's just and fill it in. That too can be an indicator that we're allowing bad behavior and that a courageous conversation might be needed. Now, I love talking about this because these first two slides, people can think of a million examples, right? Oh, it's this, that's just how it is. Oh, I know so-and-so, all of these things. When we get to this question, where do you just yourself? The room usually gets a little bit quieter. This is the courageous self-dialogue that needs to happen. I'm just a blank, or that's just how I am. So the case of the bare feet on the office furniture, my license for bad behavior that I give myself is, well, I'm just a type A personality. And that becomes a license to be a nut job stress case on some days and adopt frantic as my framework instead of thinking otherwise. And it also gives me the propensity to be a nag because my husband is not a type A personality. And so for us at home, that has been my license. Well, I'm just type A. I just need to know the details. And that's not going to fly. That's a courageous conversation that I needed to have with myself about my own behavior. So when we think of these licenses for bad behavior, I want you to think instead of just and think about adjusting instead and revoke that license. So this may need to be the courageous conversation you have with yourself, both about your own behavior and about other behavior that you're allowing or condoning in your workplace, your team, or even in your home environment. Okay, so at this point, I've got a couple of questions coming in. So I want to make sure that we get to those. So keep sending them in if you got, we got about two or three that, at least two that popped in. Okay, Nicole, the courageous conversation I need to have is with my boss. She's great, but she's also a little bit of the old school mindset in that it took her a long time to climb the ladder and get good assignments. So I should just be patient with lower level work. There's that word, just. I should just be patient. Should be patient with lower level work and pay my dues. I'm ready for bigger assignments and know I'm capable of more. How do I approach this with her? So back to that, how do we use the framework when it is someone that's in a supervisory position over us? One, really do the homework on this one. The cool thing is you have this great understanding of her context, which is you need to pay your dues, you need to work hard, there needs to be a lot of time spent before you move on to that next thing or before you graduate into the next whatever it is. So understanding that context gives you a good approach for framing your courageous conversation. One, she may not be aware of what your background is. She might not be aware of the dues you've paid elsewhere. So if her context is limited to you in just a smaller framework of your current employment with her in a shorter history, that's part of your homework then, is prepping out and building that out. So when you go to her, and this is the approach I'd recommend, and say, boss, insert whatever her name is, I'd love to schedule some time on your calendar to talk about opportunities moving forward and how I can best meet your objectives and the objectives of the organization. So I love that framework because it's really other oriented. It's about what you're doing for the team, not about what you need for your career, that kind of self look. So context in the setting of that request. Don't do this on the fly. Regardless of whether or not your boss is a, hey, just drop in and we'll chat about anything type of person, these are always better to be scheduled because you can be sure that you have their attention. I would also recommend scheduling it for a shorter time, like a 30-minute meeting, so that you can introduce the topic, state the case, and then set a follow-up. The reason that's strategically advantageous is it gives them time to think about what you've said rather than feeling pressured to respond because you have 30 more minutes in the hour that was scheduled to talk. And then really doing that homework and letting them know, hey, letting her know, we need to have this courageous conversation. I feel like I could do more for the team. I've noticed this organizational objective and this one and this one. Here's how I see that I may be able to contribute. And that's where you insert your ask for those bigger assignments, but in the context of what the organization or what she specifically is trying to accomplish. So framing it as meeting those needs can be really helpful. Okay, another question. Sorry, let me scroll up. Your slides on the internal monologue totally hit me. I'm so tired of being so hard on myself, but I don't know how to stop it. I feel like I'm really good at encouraging and supporting everybody else, but I'm awful in how I speak to myself. How do you stop these thoughts? Great question. I get asked this a lot. And even I struggle with this a lot, sometimes every day. On my good weeks, not quite every day, but they definitely creep in. So number one is there's no easy way to just stop them cold turkey. The trick is sort of this idea of catch and release is a framework I like to utilize, where the thought comes in and we say, okay, I've noticed that thought, but I don't have to live that thought. And so noticing it and then allowing it to be released. Couple strategies around that. If you're a visual person, actually visualize yourself seeing that negative thought in written form and then erasing it with a big eraser, or catching it in your hands and flushing it down the toilet or sending it down the stream, whatever visual imagery works for you. Another strategy is to notice it, not ignore it, say, okay, I hear you, but then actively counteract it with something positive. So putting in some sort of affirmation, some sort of counteractive thought that helps you think otherwise. The other strategy, honestly, around this is stop judging yourself for this. And the flip side of that is stop giving yourself a license to continue in this negative way. If this was a coworker that spoke this out loud all the time, imagine how you would respond to that. So on the judgment side, the counteracting with something positive can be really powerful, because it's easy to say like, oh, I screwed that up again. Oh, now I'm having a negative thought. I'm failing. Then it's just this little guilt shame spiral that continues. So stepping back from that and saying, I did have that thought. Okay, I can choose to have a different one. The second one is I have heard people say, well, I'm just really hard on myself. And I think that is such a cop-out not to change your behavior, even if it's only in your internal monologue. So making sure you're not adjusting yourself there. I personally like the counteract method. I have a couple of phrases that I've written down and kind of kept in my arsenal, if you will. And I like to think of it as a training opportunity. So instead of a failure that I had the thought, I'm like, ooh, great opportunity to practice having a better thought. And then I insert whatever one of my counteractive thoughts might be. So that might be a strategy that works for you too. Okay, scrolling, one more question. I'm still fairly new to my organization. I'm trying to build relationships. One of the people who stepped in to show me the ropes is a pretty bad gossip, and I don't want to be seen as being too attached to her, but I also don't want to risk making her mad. How do I navigate this? Wow. This is a tricky one. So you're new to the organization, you got someone that you felt, kind of approached you, thought they were going to help show you the ropes, but it turns out they're actually a pretty wicked gossip, and you don't want to be too attached, but you also don't want to risk upsetting them either, and then you're the result of the gossip. So number one, you're probably already in the gossip realm somewhere, simply by virtue of who she is. It has nothing to do with you. So this idea of not making the gossip mill worse, I wouldn't spend a lot of time there. I would handle this, especially being new. You have a great excuse to be really busy being new. That means a lot of meetings with other people. That means a lot of time just doing your work. So that's a great excuse. Hey, I'd love to grab coffee. I can't right now. I got to get these things done. You don't have to show her your email account. She doesn't need to see what your calendar looks like. She doesn't need to read your emails in your inbox. So regardless of how busy you are, which I would assume you're actually pretty busy, that can be one tactic, is kind of avoiding it. Until you get to know the lay of the land a little bit better. The other thing I would do is I would really focus your relationships, your relationship building on other people, and really put an emphasis into there, because your insulation against that gossip, if it ever does turn against you, or your insulation against being too attached to her, is going to be other people who know you well, that can inoculate you against that. So really focusing on those other relationships. And then if over time it gets a little tricky, or if it's really that bad up front in those initial weeks or two, call it out directly and say, you know what, I need to have a little bit of a courageous conversation with you. I'm really not into gossip and it makes me really uncomfortable. So I really want to connect with you and build a relationship, but I'm not interested in talking about other people. And then stop talking. That's the mistake people often make, is they keep talking when they need to just stop. And that direct of a commentary should nip that in the bud right away. Okay, so we are winding down the webinar. I think I got to all the questions. If you think of something, feel free to email me. I'll put my email address up. You should know how to get in touch with me. And one last plug for the SG Recruiter. This is a really cool tool. I can't promote this enough, and not just because they're a partner, but because I genuinely believe in what the company does, genuinely believe in what the tool does. But go online, check this out at sgrecruiter.com, get your profile started if you're looking to move on in your career. One last plug for them as well. They offer a 10 in 10 update. It's a one-time a week email. It's the top 10 articles that you should be reading on servant leadership in the local government sphere. And so they comb through hundreds and hundreds of articles every week. It's really phenomenal. You can read them all in 10 minutes or less, and that's what it's intended to be. Great resource for you. That leaning into servant leadership can also help you with those courageous conversations. Okay, so next webinar, we're up in October 17th for Don't Overreact, but Don't Underreact. That's a really fun topic. That was something I learned from a mentor early on in my career, a boss actually, for how to frame my responses to what I was dealing with and what I was up against. So that's coming up. And with that, let's go ahead and connect. I'm on LinkedIn as Nicole Daly Lantz. My email is on the screen, nicole@nicolelantzstrategies.com. I wish you all an amazing rest of the day. Again, thank you for what you do. If you want a little bit more interactive coaching on your courageous conversations, please reach out to me, and I'd love to have just an introductory conversation, see if I can help you out, give you a few more tactics specifically catered to where you're at. Thank you so much for joining. Visit the League of Women in Government and SGR online, and we'll see you next month. Have a great day.